What if I told you that Saudi Arabia, the kingdom that has been closely tied to the US for decades, is quietly shifting its allegiance, and it's not just a political move? This change could reshape the global financial order as we know it, and it's already in motion. Stick with me because what I'm about to reveal could affect you in ways you never expected. There's a photograph from the White House taken in November 2025 that you need to sear into your memory. It captures a defining moment: Donald Trump standing proudly in the Oval Office alongside Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. Both men are grinning widely, their faces filled with an unmistakable sense of triumph. Trump holds up a piece of paper which he displays with visible pride for the cameras. The headline that day, blaring across news outlets, read, "Historic Partnership, America First, the Deal of the Century." Reporters hailed it as a monumental success. Trump himself declared it the crowning achievement of his presidency. He stood at that podium, puffing out his chest, and announced that Saudi Arabia had become America's 20th major non-NATO ally. He unveiled a series of agreements: F-35 fighter jets, new defense pacts, and a jaw-dropping $600 billion investment pledge from Saudi Arabia. He even went so far as to proclaim, almost word for word, "We've always been on the same side of every issue." In that moment, Trump believed with all his heart that he had solidified America's hold on the Middle East, pulling the region into Washington's orbit while dealing a devastating blow to China's influence, one that Beijing would never recover from. But what Trump couldn't see, what his team failed to recognize, was that Mohammed bin Salman had just played him masterfully. As Trump stood there beaming with pride, holding that piece of paper and announcing the so-called deal of the century, Chinese and Saudi naval forces were concluding 2 weeks of joint military exercises at the King Abdulaziz Naval Base in Jubail, located on the Persian Gulf. Warships, drills, counter-terrorism operations, tactical shooting, Saudi and Chinese forces conducting military maneuvers side by side while MBS's seat in the Oval Office was still warm. This wasn't a gesture of a partner pivoting toward America. This was a country that had already chosen its path, a path that didn't involve Washington. The future MBS had envisioned was no longer tethered to the US. To truly understand how we arrived at this moment, we need to rewind to the deal that was meant to define Trump's second term, the grand bargain, the pivot, the ambitious plan to reshape the Middle East for generations. On paper, it seemed both simple and elegant. Saudi Arabia would normalize diplomatic relations with Israel, officially joining the Abraham Accords, Trump's landmark achievement from his first term, which had already brought Israel together with the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan. In exchange, the United States would offer Saudi Arabia everything it had ever wanted: a formal security treaty, F-35 fighter jets, cutting-edge AI technology, and civilian nuclear cooperation. Riyadh would be elevated to a new level of global prominence. Israel would finally gain the recognition from the Arab world's most powerful state, a recognition it had longed for over decades. And Trump, he would secure the crowning jewel of his foreign policy legacy: the handshake, the photograph, the Nobel Peace Prize chatter, the story that seemed destined to write itself. For a brief moment in 2023, it all appeared to be within grasp. Mohammed bin Salman himself told Fox News that the deal was the biggest historical event since the end of the Cold War, and that every day they were getting closer. American officials were quietly optimistic. The machinery was in motion. It seemed like the groundwork for a historic breakthrough was firmly in place. Then October 7, 2023 happened. The world changed. The war in Gaza didn't merely delay Saudi-Israel normalization, it obliterated the very political conditions that had made it even remotely possible in the first place. Saudi public opinion, which had always been skeptical about normalization, hardened into fierce, unanimous opposition. By August 2025, the Washington Institute for Near East Policy surveyed Saudi citizens, asking whether establishing normal relations with Israel would be a positive or negative development. The results were staggering. A crushing 99% of Saudis said it would be negative, not a simple majority, not even a supermajority. A nearly unanimous 99%. This wasn't a mere polling fluctuation. This was a society that had drawn an unmistakable line in the sand. And Mohammed bin Salman, for all his ruthlessness and strategic genius, is no fool. He is a master of political calculation, never making moves that could risk his grasp on power. With 99% of the Saudi public opposed, with images of the Gaza conflict playing on a loop across the kingdom's screen. Ends with Saudi clerics, social media voices, and citizens across the nation condemning any attempt to normalize ties with Israel as a betrayal of the Palestinian cause. MBS made a quiet but crucial decision. He would take everything Washington had offered, pocket it, and give nothing in return. That's exactly what transpired in the November 2025 meeting at the White House. Mohammed bin Salman arrived, as gracious and charming as ever, He signed the defense agreements, accepted the designation of a major non-NATO ally, a status that granted Saudi Arabia preferential access to American weapons and military training, a status that had previously been reserved only for Washington's closest and most trusted partners. He accepted the F-35 deal. He committed to the $600 billion investment pledge. He smiled for the cameras, exuding warmth and cooperation. But then, standing next to Donald Trump in front of the world's press, MBS made it clear Saudi Arabia wanted to be part of the Abraham Accords, but Saudi Arabia also wanted a clear, credible, and irreversible path to a Palestinian state. Not an abstract discussion, not a vague commitment, but a fully realized Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital. Trump, who had hoped for a swift deal announcement, got something entirely different, a polite yet unmistakable televised refusal. At the very same moment, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was reaffirming his own position, speaking before the cameras and making it clear that he would oppose any future Palestinian state. No room for flexibility, no diplomatic hedging, just a firm rejection intended to keep his far-right coalition intact. The deal, it turned out, was already dead. It just hadn't fully dawned on everyone yet. But this, as it turns out, is where the real story begins. The death of the normalization deal, that's just the surface. The true story lies in what Saudi Arabia has been constructing in the background, quietly, steadily, and with great patience, while Washington was lost in its own political turmoil. While the United States turned inward, focused on its domestic noise, Saudi Arabia was silently nurturing a profound relationship with China, one that has long since evolved from being a mere economic hedge to a full-blown alternative framework for the future. Let's start with the essentials. China overtook the United States years ago to become Saudi Arabia's largest trading partner. Saudi Arabia now exports more oil to China than to any other nation on earth. But China isn't just another buyer of oil, it is the buyer. Every barrel of oil keeping the Saudi economy running, every rial fueling Vision 2030, every towering skyscraper rising in Riyadh, every neon-lit kilometer stretching across the desert, all of it is sustained by Chinese demand. The United States, despite its vast military presence and political muscle in the region, imports only a fraction of Saudi oil compared to China. And China, recognizing the leverage it holds, has been moving aggressively to turn this economic dependency into a structural relationship, one that binds Saudi Arabia even more deeply into China's orbit. Huawei, the Chinese telecommunications giant that Washington spent years trying to ban, has now deeply integrated itself into Saudi Arabia's infrastructure. Since 2019, most Gulf telecom companies, including Saudi giants like Mobily, have partnered with Huawei to develop 5G networks across the region. At the heart of Mohammed bin Salman's $500 billion NEOM project, a groundbreaking smart city initiative, Chinese construction companies and digital infrastructure are not merely contributors, they are the very foundation upon which this ambitious vision is being built. This is no coincidence. The US has repeatedly demanded that Saudi Arabia remove Huawei from its networks, citing the threat of espionage and potential security breaches. Despite these warnings, Huawei remains a crucial partner. In fact, the rollout of the next-generation 5.5G networks continues to progress smoothly with Chinese companies at the helm. Now let's take a moment to truly grasp the implications of this. At the same time that Saudi Arabia is working closely with Huawei, the US is preparing to sell its most advanced military technology, the F-35 stealth fighters, to the kingdom. These aircraft are considered to be among the most sophisticated pieces of military hardware in the world. Yet at the same time, American intelligence agencies have raised alarms that Huawei's presence in Saudi Arabia's telecommunications networks could create a backdoor for Chinese intelligence to access sensitive information shared between the US and Saudi forces. The F-35's cutting-edge capabilities depend heavily on seamless software integration, and it is this very integration that presents vulnerabilities that could be exploited through Huawei's infrastructure. The US is preparing to transfer these advanced stealth fighters to Saudi Arabia, even as China quietly builds a technological footprint within the kingdom's communications infrastructure. This presents a uniquely precarious situation, one in which Saudi Arabia is positioned between two global superpowers, its military future closely tied to the US, while its technological future increasingly aligned with China. Then, in June 2024, Saudi Arabia's central bank joined Project mBridge, a cross-border payment platform designed around China's digital yuan. This move is far from insignificant. mBridge has the potential to radically alter global financial dynamics by allowing Saudi Arabia to settle oil transactions outside the SWIFT system, outside the US dollar system, and beyond the reach of Washington's influence. This could have profound consequences for US hegemony in the global financial system. If Saudi Arabia succeeds in using Enbridge for its oil transactions, it would essentially neutralize the very sanctions that the US has long relied upon to exert economic pressure on countries like Iran and Russia. It could mean that countries no longer need to rely on the US dollar to settle trade, and the US ability to enforce its financial policies based on the dollar's dominance would be severely weakened. While Saudi Arabia has not yet fully transitioned away from the dollar, the rial remains pegged to the dollar, and the vast majority of global oil trade still operates in dollars. The kingdom is carefully laying the groundwork for a shift. The infrastructure is being constructed step by step behind the scenes. Saudi Arabia is, in essence, building an exit ramp from the dollar system, preparing for a moment in the future when it may no longer need the dollar to maintain its economic stability. When that moment arrives, it will not come with grand announcements or dramatic shifts. It will happen slowly, quietly, like a tide turning imperceptibly at first, until it becomes clear that the financial landscape has changed irrevocably. The architecture being built today in Saudi Arabia is designed to withstand the pressures of a rapidly changing global order, one in which the US no longer holds exclusive control over the world's financial and economic systems. This shift is not just a matter of policy or economics, it is a strategic maneuver with long-term implications. By embracing alternatives to the dollar and strengthening its relationship with China, Saudi Arabia is signaling to the world that it is preparing for a future where Washington's influence over global financial transactions is no longer a given. And while the US may be distracted by its own domestic issues and political volatility, Saudi Arabia is positioning itself as a central player in a new multipolar world order. With China's economic might and technological infrastructure at its side, and with Russia, Iran, and other nations potentially following suit, Saudi Arabia is quietly constructing an alternative framework that could shift the balance of power in global trade and finance. For now, Saudi Arabia still enjoys its position as a key player in the US-led global order, but the signs are clear. The kingdom is no longer waiting for Washington's next move. It is taking matters into its own hands, ensuring that it will have the flexibility and the independence to thrive in a future where the US dollar may no longer hold sway. This quiet but significant pivot is a clear message to both Washington and Beijing. Saudi Arabia is positioning itself as a critical node in the evolving global order, and it is no longer bound by the constraints of the past. In the coming years, the US may very well find itself grappling with the consequences of a world where the dollar's dominance is no longer absolute, and where countries like Saudi Arabia have found alternative paths to financial and strategic independence. The shift may seem gradual at first, but as Saudi Arabia continues to build these strategic alliances and economic partnerships, the global power dynamics will begin to change in ways that could be felt across markets, economies, and geopolitical relationships. The world is evolving, and the Middle East, once a pawn in a global chess game dominated by Western powers, is now laying the groundwork for its own future, one where the US is no longer the central player. The country has also formally joined BRICS and become a dialogue partner in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO. These aren't just symbolic gestures or empty formalities. BRICS and the SCO represent the institutions that are slowly but surely undergirding a multipolar world order, an order in which the United States is no longer the sole arbiter of global rules. By aligning itself with these organizations, Saudi Arabia is signaling that it envisions a future that extends beyond American dominance and influence. It's an implicit declaration that Riyadh is looking to play a much larger, independent role on the global stage, one where it isn't beholden to Washington's dictates. And the military side of this shift is equally significant. The joint military exercises between Saudi and Chinese naval forces, these aren't just isolated events. Saudi Arabia has signed a mutual defense pact with Pakistan, further diversifying its security alliances and solidifying its relationships outside of Washington's sphere. By doing so, Riyadh is taking steps to ensure its own security, recognizing the lessons of Ukraine and Afghanistan. When you place all your trust and security in Washington, you leave yourself vulnerable to sudden, unpredictable shifts in US foreign policy. In an increasingly volatile world, Riyadh has opted to hedge its bets. It's ensuring that no matter what happens in Washington, it will have the political, military, and economic resilience to thrive. In the grander context of this shift, Trump's lavish visit to Riyadh in May 2025 was little more than theater. Saudi fighter jets escorted Air Force One as if it were an occasion of unparalleled importance. Billions of dollars in deals were announced, but those figures were in reality little more than aspirational pledges. No significant capital flowed, no major investments were realized. The promises that were made were just that, vague promises with no clear substance behind them. Meanwhile, what Saudi Arabia actually walked away with was a formal status as a major non-NATO ally. MBS secured F-35 sales, nuclear cooperation talks, and critical security guarantees. He achieved everything he set out to accomplish, while Trump in the end was left with little more than photographs and vague commitments that held little real weight. And then there's the Israeli-Saudi normalization deal, which was supposed to be the centerpiece of Trump's Middle East vision. It's not delayed, it's not stalled, it's dead. The idea of this deal ever materializing has all but evaporated. Analysts are no longer wondering when it will happen. Now they are asking whether it's even remotely feasible anymore. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia is moving forward. Vision 2030, MBS's grand blueprint to transform Saudi Arabia into a global powerhouse, is deeply intertwined with China's interests. Chinese companies are bidding on major projects. China is rapidly becoming the largest importer of Saudi oil, and in return, China is helping to build Saudi Arabia's future. The petrodollar system, once the bedrock of US financial power since 1974, is now facing a real existential challenge. Saudi Arabia has been quietly constructing an alternative financial system, one that could eventually allow it to bypass the US dollar entirely. This isn't a distant dream, it's a strategic shift that is unfolding in real time. The dollar's role as the world's reserve currency is no longer as secure as it once was, and Saudi Arabia is positioning itself to play a key role in an emerging financial landscape where the dominance of the US dollar may no longer be a given. The kingdom's move toward constructing this alternative financial framework is not just about economic power, it's about reclaiming control over its own future, ensuring that Saudi Arabia is not just a passive player in the global system, but an active, strategic force capable of shaping its own destiny. As the global power dynamics continue to evolve, Saudi Arabia is steadily positioning itself for a future where it can navigate away from American influence, securing new, powerful alliances and diversifying its economic and security portfolio. The once unshakable dominance of the US dollar is under threat, and Saudi Arabia, alongside China and other emerging powers, is laying the foundation for a more independent and multipolar world order, one where the kingdom will no longer simply be a pawn in the game, but a major player in the new global chessboard. If Saudi Arabia ever fully pivots, if it starts directing a significant portion of its oil revenues through yuan-based systems, the dollar's dominance will face a seismic challenge. It won't just be a minor shift, it will reverberate across the global financial landscape. Interest rates will rise, the cost of US borrowing will surge, inflation will become structurally higher. Everything tied to borrowed dollars, your mortgage, your car loan, federal programs, government debt, will become more expensive. That moment isn't on the immediate horizon, but the architecture being carefully constructed in Riyadh today is positioning Saudi Arabia for a future where the dollar's supremacy becomes optional, not mandatory. The kingdom is quietly preparing for a world where the very currency that has underpinned American economic power for decades is no longer the centerpiece of global trade. This potential shift could unfold in several ways, each with profound implications. The optimistic scenario, at least from Washington's perspective, sees Trump doubling down on economic pressure against Saudi Arabia, imposing tariffs, issuing threats, publicly humiliating the kingdom for its growing independence. But such tactics may only accelerate the trend Saudi Arabia is already on, deepening Riyadh's conviction that the US is an unreliable partner, unable to be trusted for the long haul. The more likely scenario, though, is one of slow, strategic drift, no dramatic rupture, but an expanding gap between American rhetoric and Saudi actions. The normalization deal with Israel remains frozen, stalled indefinitely. The petrodollar system, the very foundation of US financial dominance, slowly begins to erode piece by piece until it's no longer the default currency in global trade. The most aggressive scenario involves Mohammed bin Salman calculating his options with a keen eye on Trump's political instability. Sensing an opportunity to shift allegiances, MBS might make a decisive move toward Beijing, a clear signal that Saudi Arabia is choosing its future beyond the American sphere of influence. This isn't simply a hedge or a maneuver to balance its relations. It's a bold choice to declare to the world that the post-American Middle East is here, and it will no longer be shaped solely by Washington's policies. Such a move would send shockwaves through the global economy, shaking financial markets, realigning political alliances, and forcing other nations to reconsider their own relationships with the US. Any one of these actions, whether it's strategic drift or an outright pivot, would mark a momentous shift in the balance of power. Trump's failure in the Middle East isn't about a lack of ambition or a failure to act decisively. It's about a lack of patience, consistency, and the ability to build long-term commitments that endure beyond the cyclical nature of American elections. MBS, on the other hand, has a different understanding of global diplomacy. He knows that whatever Washington promises today can be undone by the next administration, or by this one with a sudden shift in policy. China, however, operates on a different timeline. It builds relationships not over the course of a single election cycle but over decades. It doesn't moralize or attach conditions based on human rights or ideological alignment. China invests, builds, and delivers, making long-term commitments that withstand the test of time. For Saudi Arabia, this consistency and reliability are invaluable. When the kingdom looks to the future, it knows that China's engagement is far more dependable than the unpredictable nature of American foreign policy. And in a world increasingly defined by such uncertainties, MBS understands that the stability of China's approach may be the key to securing Saudi Arabia's place in the future global order. For Saudi Arabia, a nation that is strategically planning for a future far beyond the exhaustion of its oil wealth, China's reliability is more valuable than anything America can offer. While Trump viewed the Middle East as a series of deals to be struck, quick, tangible agreements that could be sold as victories in the media, Mohammed bin Salman understands that the region's future is not a series of fleeting transactions. For MBS, the Middle East is a civilization project, one that spans centuries, not election cycles. It is a long-term endeavor that doesn't fit neatly into the short-term, often unpredictable transactional model that Trump operates within. There's a moment that perfectly encapsulates this entire shift. After MBS left the White House, Trump stood at his podium, beaming with pride, calling the meeting with the Saudi crown prince the greatest of his presidency. He celebrated what he believed to be a diplomatic triumph, a victory he could point to as the crowning achievement of his term. But across the Atlantic, in quiet corners of the global analysis community, experts noted a stark reality. Saudi Arabia had secured everything it wanted from the meeting: F-35 fighter jets, defense agreements, the designation of a major non-NATO ally, while offering little to nothing in return. The promises Trump celebrated were little more than empty gestures. And just weeks later, Chinese Vice President Han Zhang was in Riyadh, meeting with MBS to further solidify their growing relationship. At the same time, Chinese warships wrapped up military exercises in the Gulf, and Huawei was deploying its next-generation 5G technology across Saudi cities. That photograph in the Oval Office, Trump's grand moment of supposed diplomatic victory, will undoubtedly remain on the wall, but the deal that was supposed to change the course of history has gone nowhere. It's dead in the water. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia continues to lay the groundwork for an entirely different future, one where the United States may still have a seat at the table, but it's no longer sitting at the head. The future is being shaped in Riyadh, not Washington. And if Saudi Arabia fully pivots toward China, as many indicators suggest it will, the next major oil contract could be denominated in yuan rather than dollars. When that happens, the dollar's dominance will face its most significant test, one that could shift the global financial order as we know it. This is just the beginning. Saudi Arabia, having made its quiet shift toward a new strategic reality, is positioning itself for a future in which it is no longer bound to Washington's whims, and the global balance of power is slowly but surely changing. Watch closely, because the next moves could be the most defining of the 21st century. Don't miss what comes next. This is only the start. For Saudi Arabia, a country with a long-term vision that stretches far beyond the immediate horizons of its oil wealth, China's consistency and reliability have become more valuable than anything America can offer. While Trump viewed the Middle East as a collection of deals to be brokered, quick, easily digestible victories to showcase for the media, Mohammed bin Salman sees the region's future in far broader terms. To MBS, the Middle East is not just about immediate transactional gains. It is a grand, long-term civilization project that will unfold over centuries, not in the span of a single presidency. It is an intricate, multifaceted vision that doesn't align with the short-term, often unpredictable transactional model that Trump operated within. The global order that MBS is working to create is not built on momentary wins, but on durable, strategic relationships that will endure far beyond today's headlines. There is a defining moment that encapsulates the stark contrast in the way Trump and MBS perceive the future of the Middle East. After MBS left the White House, Trump stood at his podium, grinning ear to ear, declaring the meeting with Saudi Arabia the greatest of his presidency. He spoke proudly of the deal of the century and hailed the agreements as monumental successes, crowning them as defining accomplishments in his foreign policy. However, what Trump failed to see, and what analysts across the globe quietly recognized, is that Saudi Arabia had achieved everything it sought from the meeting while giving almost nothing in return. The US was promised F-35 fighter jets, defense pacts, and the prestigious title of major non-NATO ally, but none of these promises came with anything substantial for Washington. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia walked away with precisely what it needed: military equipment, economic pledges, and a far more lucrative relationship with China, a country that had been quietly becoming its most important partner. In the weeks that followed that meeting, the contrast between Trump's jubilant declarations and the growing reality became even more pronounced. While Trump celebrated his victory, Chinese Vice President Han Zhang arrived in Riyadh, meeting with MBS to further cement their strategic partnership. At the same time, Chinese warships were concluding naval exercises in the Gulf, signaling China's expanding military presence in the region. Huawei, the Chinese tech giant, was actively deploying its next-generation 5G technology in Saudi cities, further embedding Chinese infrastructure within the kingdom. The photographs of Trump's handshake with MBS, taken with such fanfare, may remain on the walls of the White House, but the deal that was supposed to reshape the world, it's gone nowhere. The ambitions of Trump's administration to establish lasting control over the region, to secure a strategic victory that would mark the apex of his Middle East legacy, are now little more than a distant memory. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia is quietly preparing for an entirely different future, one in which the United States may still have a presence, but it is no longer the dominant force at the table. Saudi Arabia is reorienting itself toward an emerging multipolar world order, one where China plays a central role in its long-term strategy. In this new world, the US may continue to have a seat at the table, but it will no longer be in the position of power it once held. The shift that Saudi Arabia is quietly orchestrating is not a sudden break from Washington, but a gradual repositioning toward a future where its alliances, its economic strategies, and its security frameworks are less dependent on US leadership and more aligned with the growing influence of China. And this is where things become even more consequential. As Saudi Arabia moves forward, the possibility of the next major oil contracts being denominated in yuan rather than dollars becomes a real and imminent possibility. If this happens, the US dollar will face its most significant test since it first became the world's reserve currency. For decades, the US has used its currency as a tool of global influence. Countries across the world have been forced to use dollars to purchase oil, a dynamic known as the petrodollar. But the shift toward the yuan would be nothing short of a seismic challenge to the dollar's dominance, and the impact would ripple through every corner of the global economy, from the cost of borrowing to global trade flows, from the price of goods to the stability of markets. The consequences would be profound. This shift is not something that will unfold tomorrow. It is not a matter of a single bold declaration. It is the product of years of quiet diplomacy, strategic alignments, and economic diversification. The infrastructure that is being carefully laid out today in Riyadh is setting the stage for a future where the US dollar is no longer the cornerstone of the global financial system. Saudi Arabia is not only moving away from its reliance on American military power and economic might, but it is also carefully constructing a new financial framework, one that can operate independently of Washington's influence. This isn't a hasty decision, it's a slow, deliberate process of repositioning itself in the new global order. And this unfolding shift could manifest in several ways. The most optimistic scenario from Washington's perspective would see Trump or his successors doubling down on economic pressure against Saudi Arabia, perhaps through tariffs, threats, or public humiliation. However, this would likely only accelerate the trend Saudi Arabia is already on. Such actions would confirm Riyadh's belief that the US is no longer a reliable partner for the long term, and it would only push Saudi Arabia closer to China, further deepening its shift away from Washington. The more likely scenario involves strategic drift. There will be no dramatic break, no public divorce. Instead, we'll see an expanding gap between American rhetoric and Saudi actions. The normalization deal with Israel, once seen as the keystone of Trump's Middle East policy, will remain frozen indefinitely. The petrodollar system will slowly but steadily erode, undermined by gradual moves away from dollar-based transactions and toward alternatives like the yuan. These shifts may not be immediately visible, but over time, they will shift the very foundation of the global financial system. Then there is the most aggressive scenario. Mohammed bin Salman, observing the growing political instability in Washington, may calculate that now is the time to make a decisive move toward Beijing. This would not be a hedge or a balancing act. It would be a choice, a bold signal to the world that the post-American Middle East has arrived. Such a move could involve a major deal denominated in yuan or a defense pact that strengthens military ties with China, cementing Riyadh's departure from the US sphere of influence. This kind of move would send shockwaves through global markets, shaking financial systems and forcing other nations to reassess their own strategic alliances. Trump's failure in the Middle East is not merely a result of a lack of ambition or vision. It is rooted in a deeper flaw, a lack of patience, consistency, and the ability to build long-term commitments that survive the inevitable changes of political leadership. MBS, in contrast, understands the importance of stable, long-term partnerships. He knows that whatever Washington promises today can be undone by the next administration or even by the current one on a whim. In contrast, China builds relationships over decades, offering consistency, investment, and long-term partnership without the moralizing or ideological conditions that the US often attaches to its alliances. For MBS, the choice is clear. Saudi Arabia's future lies not with the unpredictability of Washington, but with the long-term stability and reliability offered by Beijing. As the geopolitical chessboard continues to shift, Saudi Arabia is positioning itself at the center of a new world order, one where the US may still have a seat but its influence is no longer paramount. The transition may be gradual, but it is inevitable. The foundations are being laid today in Riyadh, and in the years to come we will see the full impact of these changes unfold. For those watching closely, the shift toward a new global power structure is already underway. This is just the beginning, and what comes next will reshape the future of global trade, finance, and diplomacy. This is just the beginning, and the future is unfolding right before our eyes. Don't miss a single moment of this dramatic shift in global power. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay tuned, because we're diving even deeper into how these changes could impact the world economy, your pocketbook, and what comes next on the global stage.